Uh-oh. Motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Former IBF champion Subriel Matias is 8-1 against Southpaws, confident that he'll handle the left-handed Alberto Puello. Subriel Matias was 8-0 against Southpaws prior to his IBF junior welterweight title defense against Australia's own Liam Pardo a year ago. That entire event was built around making Matias a star in Puerto Rico, where he was born and raised. Pardo was undefeated, but the hard-hitting Matias, 22-2 with 22 knockouts, was favored to retain his title and move on to more marketable bouts within the 140-pound division.
22-2 with 22 knockouts? So that means he's knocked out every man that he's beat.
The left-handed Pardo upset Matias by unanimous decision in Juan Abreu Coliseum in Manatí, Puerto Rico. The surprise loss cost Matias not only his IBF title, but his promotional deal with Eddie Hearns' Matchroom Boxing. There was nothing missing or nothing necessarily that I did wrong, Matias told The Ring recently. Pardo was just the better man than me that night.
Yeah, Liam fought a hell of a fight.
He was able to hang tight and hang in there when most other fighters would have folded. For that, he became IBF champion in Subriel's neck of the woods as the away fighter. Matias's loss to Pardo didn't dissuade him from jumping to challenge another top southpaw in Alberto Puello for his WBC super lightweight title on July 12th at the Louis Armstrong Stadium in Queens, New York. Just look at the results, Matias said. This is going to be my 10th fight against the southpaw, and of the previous 9, I've knocked out 8 of them. So the proof is in the pudding. The Dominican Republic's Puello, 24-0 with 10 KOs, is probably more skillful than any of the 9 southpaws Matias has faced. He's the only opponent who has beaten WBA champion Gary Antoine Russell, 18-1 with 17 knockouts, whom Puello outpointed by way of a split decision in June of 2024 at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Vegas. The odds are essentially even on the Puello versus Matias fight. It's going to be a big challenge for me. Definitely something I'm looking forward to, especially having lost to Liam Pardo, Matias said. It's going to allow me to see where I stand in this division.
Can he do it?
Well, Subriel Matias is a devastating puncher, a devastating fighter, so long as he can keep you in front of him. And that's the problem with the Puello fight. Puello is a boxer. Puello is a mover, a jabber.
Subriel Matias has some of the poorest footwork in the entire 140-pound division. That's no exaggeration. What he lacks in footwork, he makes up for in power. But if he can't get to you, well, he can't deliver that power.
Puello, 30 years old, edged Spanish southpaw Sandor Martin, 42-4 with 15 knockouts by split decision in his last fight. A 12-round match, March 1st at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, New York. Puello will encounter a completely different fighter in the right-handed Matias, whose pressure and power usually wears down his opponents. For Matias, 33 years old, it's an opportunity to regain the leverage and momentum he had before Pardo upset him. Pardo, 26-1 with 16 knockouts, lost his title to Brooklyn's Richardson Hitchins in his first defense in December of last year at Roberto Clemente Coliseum in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Matias was still the IBF's #1 contender when Hitchins, 20-0 with 8 KOs, opted for an easier option defense against former champion George Cambodia.
So if not for that, Subriel Matias would be knocking on the door of a Richardson-Hitchins fight. Very winnable fight if I say so myself.
Matias hopes that Hitchins will be more eager to fight him if he can beat Puello, which would make for a title unification fight. I don't think that Richardson-Hitchins will stay in this division long enough for that to happen.
The IBF has ordered a final eliminator between former champion Liam Paro and unbeaten up-and-comer Lindolfo Delgado. Whoever wins that fight becomes Hitchins' mandatory.
In July, it will have been 13 months since I had that last opportunity to fight for a world title, Matias said. The way I have fought since then shows that I am resilient, that I can go after things, and that now I am focused and ready for July 12th. Puello versus Matias is part of Ring 3, a pay-per-view event DAZN will distribute worldwide from one of the venues where the United States Open Tennis Tournament is played each summer. DAZN's coverage of the Ring's next show will begin at 6 p.m. Eastern Time in the United States for $69.99.
24 pounds in the United Kingdom.
The bookies have this fight at close to even money, and they have it at close to even money for good reason. It's because Puello has the footwork and the movement that Subriel doesn't have, but Subriel has the aggression and stopping power that Alberto doesn't have. How to best describe the stylistic matchup? Well, Subriel, it's very obvious that Subriel is a pressure guy, his straightforward approach, whereas Alberto seems like a cross between a pure boxer and a boxer puncher.
And he has seen at least one aggressive volume puncher like Subriel before, when he fought Gary Antoine Russell, and he decisioned him.
So he's not exactly in unfamiliar territory, though at the same time, I don't think Gary Russell packs the wallop that Subriel packs. I think that punch for punch, even though Subriel is more limited, he punches a lot harder than Gary Antoine Russell does. He has a way of grinding down his opponents so long as he can land those punches. Can he land on Puello?
This is a 50-50 fight.
But I'll tell you that the division would be a lot better off if there were an action fighter, if there were a puncher holding that WBC title, than if Alberto holds that title. Alberto's been champion for a while, but nobody seems to care.
He's not really a memorable fighter, doesn't have a memorable fighting style. Subriel Matias leaves more of an impression.
And we all know that the Puerto Rican boxing fans are to the East Coast what the Mexican boxing fans are to the West Coast. So it might actually be better for the division if there's a Puerto Rican champion there to muster up some business.
I would like to see Subriel Matias win this fight, but I don't know with any certainty that he will.
The bookies have got this as close to even money for a reason. In men's light heavyweight news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now, David Benavidez is set to defend his newly obtained WBC light heavyweight title against Anthony Yarde in November. Yarde will have a third crack at a world title as David Benavidez makes his first defense of his WBC crown in his Riyadh season debut come November. His Excellency Turki El Sheikh today announced on X that after months of speculation over Benavidez's next move, he will face two-time title challenger Anthony Yarde. The exact date and venue has yet to be confirmed.
This is good news. I think this is good news for everybody, for the boxing fans, for the Benavidez stands.
I've long maintained that given the targets that David Benavidez has as a light heavyweight, it's only right that he pair up with Turki El Sheikh, because Turki can get him those fights, and he can get him those fights in a timely fashion. Anthony Yarde, 27-3 with 24 knockouts, recovered from a sluggish start to outpoint Lyndon Arthur and settle their trilogy on the Eubank vs. Ben undercard at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on April 26th. Benavidez, 30-0 with 24 KOs, emerged unscathed from a thrilling firefight with contender David Morrell 2 months earlier in his second bout as a light heavyweight.
So, what happened to David being a Vegas fighter?
That's the one thing they talk about, like Turki El Sheikh, and they tell you, would you ever fight with them over there in Riyadh? But at the end of the day, all my fan base is here in Las Vegas. I'm a Las Vegas fighter, you know what I mean? I would love to go over there and fight, but this is my market right here, and I want to take advantage of this market because I've worked 11 years to. This is my first time having a freaking crowd like that, so I want to stay here.
I'd wager that the numbers for David Benavidez's 3 pay-per-view appearances, the ones that he headlined, the Caleb Plant fight, the Andrade fight, the Morrell fight, were not so robust when you compare them to the money that he could be making in Saudi Arabia. At the end of the day, money talks and bullshit rides a bus.
I thought it walked.
This latest development comes after negotiations with WBO interim light heavyweight champion Callum Smith, 31-2 with 22 knockouts, had been ongoing as far back as April, with the Liverpudlian's promoter Eddie Hearn confirming he'd been in touch with Benavidez's management team about scheduling that fight in the final quarter of this year. Smith had been in Istanbul, Turkey, this week for the IBA's latest pro event and spoke publicly as late as Wednesday night about renewed optimism that they could get a deal done.
I didn't think they would, and it looks like they didn't.
Provided the financials were right and all parties were in agreement on a suitable fight date.
So where did it all go wrong for what was supposed to be David Benavidez versus Callum Smith? Eddie Hearn recently elaborated upon that.
We couldn't get a deal over the line for Callum Smith. We've been trying to get a deal over the line to do the fight in the US. We couldn't get to the number that Callum was happy with. Then you got to understand the position that Callum Smith's in. He's the WBO interim world champion. He's going to get called as the mandatory challenger, may even get to a position where that is an elevation to world championship. And then all of a sudden, 48 hours ago, we spoke to Turki Al-Sheikh and Louis de Cubas trying to make the Callum Smith-Benavidez fight. And we couldn't find the number. So Yarde took the number, took the fight, and he's got it. And it was a very quick turnaround, probably the last 48 hours. Really, the fight got made out of nowhere.
It would seem that it came down to money, and that's what I always warn, that Callum Smith has a reputation behind the scenes for driving a hard bargain, and in previous years, that's a part of why he wasn't more active, because he wants a lot of money every time he gets out there. I figured, here in America, Benavidez versus Smith.
I mean, that's a good fight, but that's not a big fight. And remember who the offer was coming from. The offer for Benavidez versus Smith in America, it was coming from the PBC.
So how much money do you think they were willing to spend just to bring little old Callum Smith to Las Vegas?
You heard what Eddie Hearn said. They couldn't make the numbers work, and I figured that they couldn't, because the Callum Smith fight is a good fight for the hardcores, but it's not a big fight overall. It's not a big fight for the casuals.
Enter Anthony Yarde. Anthony, who suffered a career-first defeat in August of 2019, falling short, but earning credit aplenty after Sergey Kovalev scored an 11th round stoppage win to retain his then WBO title 3.5 years later. He gave a then unbeaten Artur Beterbiev all he could handle during an absorbing contest, but again, fell short, losing via 8th round stoppage. He was last in action in the third installment of Yarde versus Lyndon Arthur.
On the undercard of Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank.
They were both 1-1 with each other going into that third fight. Lyndon won the first one, Anthony won the second. This was the tiebreaker.
Anthony won.
So now he's fighting David Benavidez for David Benavidez's WBC title. And there's a lot to unpack here. Not just thinking about the fight itself, but the repercussions and what it means. Because David Benavidez is one of the few flagship fighters the PBC has left. And if he's boxing in Saudi in Riyadh season in November, he's not boxing on PBC on Amazon.
What do you think finally made him come around?
The short answer is the money. He makes more money boxing in Saudi than trying to sell pay-per-views in America, at a time where boxing in the American market is in decline and pay-per-view sales aren't what they used to be, in part due to a lack of interest and another part due to piracy.
You make more money working with Turkey than trying to go it on your own.
What you get from Turkey, you get guaranteed. It's not contingent upon the upside of a pay-per-view that may be money. If the pay-per-view does well, maybe you'll get X or maybe you'll get Y. With Turkey, you know what you're getting and it's guaranteed.
You don't gotta think about it.
And the situation on PBC Island would have grown desperate that David Benavidez, one of their flagship fighters, has decided to jump ship and align himself with Turki Al-Sheikh.
Many a PBC stan has tried to poo-poo all over Turki Al-Sheikh's shows and everything he's trying to do in the sport of boxing. I don't think this is welcome news to them, because what does it say about the PBC If David Benavidez leaves them, even momentarily, to go box in Saudi,
It means what I've been telling you it means. The well is drying up over there. The Amazon deal is no substitute for the arrangement they had on Fox or the arrangement they had on Showtime because Amazon is not invested. They're not providing them much in terms of a budget.
I mean, it's obvious. They used to do something like 17 or 18 shows on Showtime alone. Last year, they only did 5.
Put simply, the PBC neither has the resources nor the bodies to accommodate David Benavidez's light heavyweight campaign. So he did the right thing, and I celebrate him for that.
That he finally made the right decision.
All before we even unpack the Anthony Yarde fight and what that fight might look like. Anthony, he didn't look too hot in his last fight with Lyndon Arthur. He didn't. But Lyndon Arthur is a very different fighter to David Benavidez. Lyndon is a boxer, a mover, a jabber, an outside fighter, whereas David Benavidez is the opposite.
He's an inside guy that tries to crowd you, tries to mow you down.
Stylistically, this is a fantastic fight when you think about it, because Anthony Yarde won't have to chase, won't have to find David, and David won't have to chase him, won't have to find him.
I feel like punch for punch. Maybe Anthony punches a little harder than David Benavidez. Anthony's been at the weight a lot longer. He certainly has more knockouts as a light heavyweight than David Benavidez does. David has none.
But at the same time, I think David might have a better engine, better cardio than Anthony Yarde. We've seen Anthony gas out more than once.
That's what costed him the Sergey Kovalev fight.
Now, granted that the Anthony Yarde that stands before us here today is a lot more experienced than that fighter was, though all the same, I would sooner expect Anthony to gas out, Anthony to tire, before David.
Who's better on the inside?
Well, that's hard to say. David Benavidez often gives his opponents both shoulders when stringing punches together. He often squares up in the middle of a combination to where if he gets caught in between, he could get knocked off balance. His feet aren't the best.
Remember, he's been knocked down by Ronald Gavril years ago, and years later, he just got knocked down by David Morrell.
So it's very hard to say that David Benavidez's fundamentals are head and shoulders better than Anthony Yarde's. That in terms of X's and O's, they both have their drawbacks. They both have their flaws.
But because David Benavidez is an unbeaten fighter, and because Anthony Yarde has already lost not one, but 2 world title attempts, I think the bookies will have David Benavidez as the favorite going in.
Disadvantages.
There is no home fighter, no house fighter here, because this is not a PBC show. It's not a Queensbury show either.
I think that's more of a disadvantage for David, more unfamiliar to David than it is to Anthony, because Anthony's traveled before. He went to Chelyabinsk, Russia for Sergey Kovalev. I don't know that David Benavidez has ever fought outside of the United States, let alone in Saudi Arabia. But I do think that he's more used to being a house fighter and having those perks than Anthony.
This fight is being fought on even terrain to where neither fighter is the house fighter and neither fighter has home field advantage.
Adding to the fight's intrigue, David is an action fighter through and through, and so is Anthony Yarde. What happens when you put 2 guys like that in the same ring?
We'll find out in November.